Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, we're diving into the heart of Olympus, but not for tales of heroism or divine wisdom. Instead, we're peeling back the gilded facade of the most powerful god in the Greek pantheon, a figure revered, feared, and often frankly appalling. You know his name, Zeus, king of the gods, lord of the sky, wielder of the thunderbolt, often portrayed as a... But what if I told you that beneath that majestic beard and regal gaze lay a being whose actions frequently bordered on the monstrous, whose moral compass was utterly shattered, and whose casual cruelty would make even mortal tyrants blush? Forget the benevolent sky, father image. Today, we're asking a question that cuts to the very core of his divine character. How truly awful was Zeus? And to answer that, we're ranking his top 10 most shocking scandals. Get ready to have your perceptions challenged, because the truth about Olympus's sovereign is far darker than the myths usually let on. Let's unmask the true nature of the Thunderer. Now, if you're as fascinated by the dark corners of mythology as we are, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. Trust me, you won't want to. Our countdown of Zeus's most awful acts starts with a foundational moment, one that set the stage for his reign, but also revealed his ruthless ambition. Number 10 on our list, the overthrow of Cronus and the Titans. You might think, but that was necessary. He saved his siblings. And yes, on the surface, it appears to be a triumph of good over tyranny. His father Cronus was a monster who swallowed his... Zeus, cunning and powerful, saved his brothers and sisters, then led them in a brutal decade-long war against his father and the elder gods, the Titans. The Titanomachy. They called it a clash of cosmic proportions that shook the very foundations of the universe. Mountains crumbled, seas boiled, and the sky itself wept fire. But here's the often overlooked horror after their victory. Zeus didn't just oppose his father. He imprisoned him and almost all the other Titans, his aunts, uncles, and even some of his own generation, in the deepest, darkest abyss of the underworld. Tartarus. Imagine the sheer, raw power and unyielding cruelty required to lock away entire generations of powerful beings, including his own. This wasn't just justice. It was a brutal, overwhelming display of force, a declaration that dissent would be met with absolute, unforgiving power. It set a precedent for his reign, absolute authority, maintained through fear and punishment. While it brought an end to Cronus's tyranny, it also ushered in a new, equally ruthless, if more sophisticated, form of divine rule. It showed us from the very beginning that Zeus, for all his claims of being a liberator, was perfectly willing to be a jailer, and a merciless one at that. It was an act of necessary evil, perhaps, but an evil nonetheless. Moving on to number 9, we encounter a scandal that, while less violent, speaks volumes about Zeus's casual disregard for mortal autonomy and his divine sense of entitlement. Ganymede was a prince of Troy, famed throughout the mortal world for his breathtaking beauty. Imagine a youth so radiant, so graceful, that even the gods whispered of his allure. He spent his days tending his flock on Mount Ida, a picture of pastoral innocence. But beauty in the world of the gods often came with a heavy price. One day, as Ganymede performed his daily tasks, the sky darkened. Suddenly, Zeus, in the guise of a mighty eagle, descended from the heavens. This wasn't a gentle approach. It was a swift, overwhelming act of capture. He snatched the young prince from the earth, carrying him far above the clouds, away from his family, his home, and his mortal life forever. The reason Zeus desired Ganymede to be his cupbearer on Olympus, replacing the goddess Hebe. Now, for the ancients, pederasty was sometimes a recognized, if controversial, social practice, and the relationship between Zeus and Ganymede was often portrayed, at least on Olympus, as a love affair. But let's be clear, this was an abduction. Ganymede had no choice, no say in the matter. He was taken, stripped of his mortal existence, and pressed into eternal service for the gods. His family mourned him as lost, not knowing he was now pouring nectar for the very being who stole him. Zeus eventually sent them some magnificent horses as compensation, a cold, hard commodity for the irreplaceable loss of a son. This act reveals Zeus's belief that anything he desired was his for the taking, regardless of the will or well-being of a mortal. His power was absolute. and he wielded it not just to rule, but to satisfy his every whim, transforming a beautiful young man into a divine servant without a second thought. It's a chilling reminder that for the gods, mortal lives were often mere playthings. Now let's delve deeper into the intricate web of deceit and desire that characterized so many of Zeus's dealings. At number 8, we find that Alcmene was a mortal queen, the wife of Amphitryon, and a woman of impeccable virtue. Her beauty was legendary, but her loyalty to her husband was unshakable. Zeus, ever the philanderer, found himself captivated by her. But how does one seduce a woman utterly devoted to her husband? Simple, for the king of the gods. You don't just seduce her. You become her husband. One night, while Amphitryon was away at war, Zeus descended from Olympus, having perfectly assumed the form and voice of Alcmene's absent husband. He arrived not with the flash of lightning, but with a fabricated story of triumph, claiming to have returned victorious from battle. Alcmene, overjoyed and unsuspecting, welcomed her husband into her bed. Zeus then proceeded to prolong that single night for 3 times its normal length, holding the sun and moon in place, ensuring he had ample time to fulfill his desires. The deception was absolute. Alcmene believed she was embracing her beloved Amphitryon, celebrating his safe return. She was utterly unaware that she was being used, her trust betrayed by a god disguised as her dearest companion. From this, imagine the psychological torment when the real Amphitryon finally returned, only to find his wife already pregnant, utterly convinced he was the father, yet knowing full well he hadn't been home. The unraveling of that lie, the confusion, the betrayal felt by both Alcmene and Amphitryon must have been devastating. Zeus, in his boundless arrogance, cared not for the emotional wreckage he left behind. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a profound violation of trust, a twisted perversion of marital love, showcasing Zeus's mastery of deceit to achieve his personal ends. Moving to number 7, we have another instance of outright abduction, but this time with an added layer of objectification. We're talking about the seduction of Aegina. Aegina was a nymph, a daughter of the river. Zeus's eyes fell upon her, and as was his custom, his desire ignited. He didn't bother with elaborate disguises or prolonged courtship this time. Instead, he simply transformed himself into a magnificent eagle, feat form he was fond of using for his more forceful pursuits, fay, and snatched her away. He carried her across vast stretches of sea to a remote island which later bore her name. Aegina. What makes this particularly egregious beyond the obvious act of kidnapping is the blatant disregard for her father's feelings. Aesopus, consumed by grief and rage, searched desperately for his lost daughter. He pursued the abductor, a divine chase across the lands, until Zeus, annoyed by the persistence of a lesser god, struck Aesopus with a thunderbolt, forcing him to retreat. Zeus's message was clear. No one, not even a distraught father, would stand in the way of his desires. The consequences for Aegina: she bore Zeus a son, Aeacus, who would go on to become a king and a revered judge in the underworld. But what of Aegina herself? Her life was irrevocably altered, her autonomy stolen, her father's pleas ignored, and her story forever tied to a god who took what he wanted without permission or consequence. It is a stark portrayal of the power dynamics between gods and mortals, where consent was an alien concept and divine whim was law. This wasn't a romance. It was a brutal demonstration of... If you are finding these stories as unsettling as we are, please hit that like button to help us share these less than heroic tales of Olympus with more people. Your support truly helps us bring these ancient myths to light. Now let's continue our descent into Zeus's truly awful moments. At number 6, we encounter one of the most iconic and perhaps visually striking examples of his Europa was a Phoenician princess, a vision of youth and beauty, known for her love of flowers and the seashore. One day, while she and her handmaidens were gathering blossoms by the water's edge, a magnificent white bull appeared. Not just any bull, mind you. This creature was radiant, gentle. Its coat as white as snow, its horns like polished jewels, it exuded an aura of calm that seemed to invite trust. Europa, charmed by its docile nature, began to play with it, adorning its horns with flowers, eventually climbing onto its broad back. The scene, for a moment, was one of pastoral idyll. But then the bull moved swiftly, silently. It charged into the sea, carrying the terrified princess away from her homeland across the vast blue expanse. Europa clung on for dear life. It was Zeus, in yet another animal guise, driven by insatiable lust. He carried her all the way to the island of Crete, a journey across continents. There, beneath a plane tree that was thereafter granted perpetual greenness, he revealed his true form and took her. This act was not just an abduction. It was a sophisticated, premeditated act of deception that preyed on Europa's innocence. He didn't use force initially. He used charm and cunning to lure her into a situation from which she could not escape. The outcome, Europa bore Zeus 3 sons, including Minos, who would become the legendary king of Crete. But the narrative often glosses over the trauma, the fear, the irreversible loss of home and family. She was a trophy, a prize seized by the most powerful being in the cosmos. It's a chilling tale of divine predation, where even apparent beauty and gentleness were mere tools for deception. Our list continues to uncover the darker aspects of Zeus's character. At number 5, we witness another act of animalistic deception, but one that has inspired countless works of art, often sanitizing its truly disturbing nature: the rape of Leda. Leda was the beautiful queen of Sparta. Her allure was such that Zeus, once again, found himself consumed by desire. He decided to approach her not as a god, nor even as a mortal man, but in the guise of a majestic swan. The myth tells us that the swan, seemingly in distress, perhaps pursued by an eagle, sought refuge in Leda's arms. Leda, in her compassion, cradled the bird, comforting it. But this was no helpless creature. It was Zeus, cunning and calculating, exploiting her empathy. In that moment of vulnerability, the swan transformed, or perhaps simply exerted its divine will, and took Leda. The outcome of this bizarre and disturbing encounter was equally surreal. Leda laid 2 eggs. From one egg hatched Helen, of Troy fame, and Clytemnestra, and from the other, Castor and Pollux. The identity of their fathers often varies, with some myths attributing all to Zeus, others a mix of Zeus and Tyndareus. Regardless, the central act remains. Leda was violated by a divine being in an animal form, an act of sexual assault disguised as the imagery of a swan, often associated with grace and beauty, here becomes a symbol of insidious deception and non-consensual power. It strips Leda of her dignity and autonomy, using her compassion against her. This myth highlights Zeus's willingness to cross any boundary, to use any trick, no matter how perverse, to satisfy his lust. It's a stark reminder that even the most beautiful and seemingly innocent creatures in myth can hide the most predatory intentions. This wasn't romance. It was a profound and unsettling violation. Brace yourselves, because we're entering territory where Zeus's actions become increasingly bizarre and invasive. At number 4, we encounter a story that sounds like something out of a nightmare, involving impossible acts of penetration and divine intrusion. The rape of Dana Fey was the beautiful daughter of King Acrisius of Argos. An oracle had foretold that Acrisius would be killed by his grandson. So, to prevent this, the king imprisoned Dana Fey in a bronze tower, or a subterranean chamber, making it utterly inaccessible to any mortal man. He thought he had outsmarted fate, but mortals, even kings, are no match for the machinations of the king of the gods. Zeus, captivated by Dana Fey's beauty, he transformed himself not into an animal or a person, but into a shower of golden rain. This wasn't a gentle sprinkling. It was a shimmering golden cascade that poured through the smallest cracks in her prison, filling her chamber, enveloping her. It was a golden, liquid form of divine penetration, an inescapable, otherworldly violation. From this impossible union, Perseus, one of King Acrisius's attempts to thwart destiny, were not only futile but tragically ironic, as Zeus himself circumvented all barriers. What makes this particularly awful is the utter lack of agency Dana Fey had. Imprisoned, isolated, she was subjected to a magical, inescapable assault by a divine entity disguised as an element. There was no physical door to lock, no guard. It's a terrifying metaphor for the absolute power of the gods, their ability to permeate and violate even the most secure boundaries, highlighting a disturbing aspect of divine might fey its omnipresent, inescapable nature when directed by desire. This was not seduction. It was an act of insidious, unyielding infiltration. As we near the top of our list, Zeus's actions become not just predatory, but also have increasingly devastating, long-lasting consequences for his victims. Number 3 on our list of Zeus's most shocking scandals. The rape of Io. Io was a beautiful priestess of Hera, serving at the goddess's temple in Argos, or a princess. Her beauty, predictably, caught Zeus's. Fearing his notoriously jealous wife Hera, Zeus tried to keep his affair with Io a secret. He would descend to earth and shroud himself and Io in a thick, dark cloud, hoping to conceal their illicit meetings. But Hera, ever vigilant, sensed her husband's infidelity. The persistent, unnatural cloud in the middle of a clear day was a dead giveaway. She descended from In a panic, Zeus performed one of his most infamous transformations. He turned Io into a beautiful white heifer to hide her identity. When Hera arrived, she saw the lovely cow and, feigning admiration, demanded it as a gift. Zeus, caught in his own lie, couldn't refuse without revealing his deception. So he gave Io, in her cow form, to Hera. Hera, knowing full well this was no ordinary cow, placed her under the watchful eye of Argus Panoptus, the 100-eyed giant who never slept, always keeping at least 2 eyes open. Io, trapped in her animal form, constantly under surveillance, suffered immensely. She tried to communicate with her father, Inachus, by scratching her name into the dust with her hoof. The realization of his daughter's plight, Zeus, finally feeling some remorse or perhaps just annoyed by Hera's triumph, sent Hermes to kill Argus, which he did through cunning and music. But Hera's vengeance was far from over. She sent a gadfly, a venomous insect, to relentlessly pursue Io, stinging her, driving her mad with pain and terror, forcing her to wander across the entire world, from Greece to Egypt, across seas, and Io's suffering was epic, a testament to Hera's relentless wrath. But ultimately, it was a direct consequence of Zeus's reckless lust and his cowardly attempt to cover it up. He was responsible for her transformation, her imprisonment, her global torment, and the emotional devastation of her family. His act of desire led to a chain of events that inflicted unimaginable misery on an innocent mortal, a tragic example of divine ego causing catastrophic collateral damage. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a saga of protracted cruelty stemming directly from Zeus's weakness and deception. Our journey through Zeus's most appalling deeds is nearing its horrifying climax. At number 2, we encounter a story of profound betrayal, abuse of power, and a tragic outcome for an innocent victim, driven by Zeus's insatiable desire and Hera's merciless revenge. We're talking about the rape of Callisto. Callisto was a nymph, a devotee of the virgin goddess Artemis, and a sworn member of her chaste retinue. She had taken a solemn vow of celibacy, dedicating her life to the hunt and the wilderness alongside Artemis. Her devotion was absolute, her purity unwavering. But of course her beauty caught the attention of Zeus. How does one approach a nymph sworn to eternal virginity under the protection of the fierce Artemis? Zeus, ever the master of disguise and deception, found a way. He transformed himself into Artemis herself, or in some versions, Apollo, Artemis's brother. Imagine the scene: Callisto out in the woods, comfortable and safe in the presence of her beloved goddess, her spiritual leader. She lowers her guard, feeling secure and cherished. It was then, in that moment of absolute trust and reverence, that Zeus, in the guise of her goddess, violated her. This act was not merely sexual assault. It was a profound spiritual defilement, a perversion of her most sacred vows, and an unimaginable betrayal of her faith and devotion. The consequences for Callisto were immediate and brutal. When her pregnancy became undeniable, Artemis, discovering the truth of her broken vow, unaware of the deception, banished Callisto from her company in a fit of rage and disgust. Callisto, disgraced and alone, soon gave birth to a son, Arcas. But her suffering wasn't over. Hera, discovering yet another of Zeus's infidelities, decided to mete out her own cruelty. She transformed Callisto into a bare, fey-lumbering, shaggy beast, forever condemned to roam the wilderness, unable to speak, hated by her former companions, and constantly hunted. Years later, her son, Arcas, grew up to be a hunter. One day he encountered his mother, still in bare form, unrecognizing her, and seeing only a dangerous animal, he prepared to kill her. Just before the fatal blow, Zeus intervened, not out of true compassion for Callisto, but to prevent the matricide. He snatched both Callisto and Arcas into the sky, transforming them into constellations, Ursa Major and Ursa Minor, the Great and Little Bears. Even in death and transformation, Hera's wrath pursued them. She persuaded the sea gods not to let the constellations dip below the horizon. Callisto's story is a harrowing saga of multiple layers of abuse. The initial violation by Zeus in a sacred guise, the banishment by Artemis, the cruel transformation by Hera, and the constant threat to her life, almost at the hands of her own son. Her life was utterly destroyed, her identity warped, and her existence turned into an eternal flight, all due to Zeus's predatory lust and This is a story that screams of divine injustice, where the victim pays the ultimate price for the sins of the gods. And now, the moment you've been waiting for, we've explored deceit, abduction, violation, and prolonged torment. But what could be worse than all of that? What act stands above the rest, solidifying Zeus's claim to being truly awful, not just as a philanderer, but as a tyrannical? At number 1 on our ranking of Zeus's most shocking scandals, the eternal punishment of Prometheus. This isn't about lust or infidelity. It is about power, defiance, and the horrific retribution exacted by a god who tolerates no challenge to his absolute authority. Prometheus, a titan who had sided with Zeus during the Titanomachy, was a benevolent figure, a champion. He saw the struggling, nascent race of mortals and felt compassion. Zeus, however, was indifferent or even hostile to humanity's plight. He initially withheld fire from mortals, believing they were unworthy of such a divine gift, perhaps even fearing their potential if they gained too much power. But Prometheus, in his profound love for humankind, defied the king of the gods. He stole fire from Olympus, bringing it down to earth, hidden within a fennel stalk, gifting humanity the spark of civilization, knowledge, and warmth. For this act of incredible generosity and defiance, Zeus unleashed a fury unlike any other. He wasn't content with a simple banishment or a short imprisonment. Zeus conceived a punishment of unimaginable cruelty and duration. He had Prometheus chained to a massive rock in the Caucasus Mountains, and there, every single day, an enormous eagle, a monstrous bird of prey, sent by Zeus himself, would descend and tear open Prometheus's flesh, devouring his liver, and every night Prometheus's liver, because he was immortal, would regenerate only to be consumed again the next day. This excruciating cycle of torment was decreed to last for all eternity, an unending agony, a perpetual living hell. Imagine the horror, the daily tearing, the searing pain, the grotesque consumption, and the full, horrifying knowledge that it would happen again tomorrow, and the day after that for all time. This wasn't just punishment. It was a demonstration of absolute, unmitigated vengeance, a chilling message to anyone who dared to question or defy the will of Zeus. Prometheus suffered for humanity, and Zeus reveled in his suffering. This act reveals Zeus not just as a lustful philanderer, but as a cruel and tyrannical dictator utterly devoid of mercy, willing to inflict the most unimaginable and drawn, out-suffering to assert his dominance. It shows a profound disregard for justice, replacing it with pure, unadulterated sadism. He punished a benevolent act with eternal torture, solidifying his image as a cosmic tyrant who would brook no compassion that ran counter to his own absolute decree. This, truly, is Zeus at his most awful, a chilling testament to the dark side of divine power. So there you have it, a raw, unvarnished look at Zeus, king of the gods, and his top 10 most shocking scandals. From the brutal imprisonment of his own family, to the abduction of beautiful youths, the deception of loyal wives, the violation of virgins, and finally, the eternal torment of a champion of humanity. Zeus consistently showed a darker side that often eclipses his supposed wisdom and benevolence. He was a force of nature, yes, but often a destructive one, leaving a trail of broken lives, shattered trust, and unimaginable suffering in his wake. These myths are more than just ancient stories. They are profound explorations of power, morality, and the complex, often terrifying, nature of authority. They force us to confront the uncomfortable truth that even the most revered figures can harbor the most monstrous of traits, and that divine power, unchecked, can be the ultimate source of terror. What do you think? Did we miss any of Zeus's truly awful acts? Let us know in the comments below. If this journey through the darker side of Olympus has captivated you, please smash that like button, share this video with fellow mythology enthusiasts, and of course, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the epic, often unsettling world of ancient myths. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Perhaps with a god who was actually, genuinely a good person. Maybe we'll see